Hi, this is Claudia Wert, and welcome to the Christus Vincit Foundation program. Today, we're delighted to host Aaron Seng, President and Founder of Tradivox. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me, Claudia. Good to be here.
So let's get started. Tell us a bit about yourself and tell listeners how you came to be interested in the traditionalist movement.
Well, sure. My name again, Aaron Seng. I'm born and raised Catholic, so I have the great privilege of being raised in the Lord's fold. It was not until 2008 that was the first time I had attended a traditional Latin Mass, as they're often called. This case, it was a Pontifical High Mass in the beautiful Abbey of La Barroue. It's kind of southern France, one of the daughter houses of the great kind of Benedictine restoration and maintenance of tradition, particularly through the 60s and 70s. So that was my first exposure. I like to say I had always had kind of a love for the deposit of faith and a predisposition to hand that on itself. But the liturgical kind of articulation of that in the old Mass was news to me per 2008. And also, again, immediate wake of Summorum Pontificum, just that prior year. So that was really the beginning of a long and wonderful love affair, I like to say, with the church's liturgical patrimony. So that time really spent in devoted study since that, and then, of course, my family. We've been very focused in handing that form of the rite to our children and educating them as well in the faith. And so that's maybe a thumbnail sketch, involvement in it, love of it. I think the biggest aspect there being the connection, as it became gradually more and more clear to me through study, of kind of maintaining the traditional doctrine on the one hand, which I again have this love for, love to teach. I'm also a diehard handout person. I love to generate handouts. Most classroom teachers will relate. And so having any kind of physical resources to hand on was a big just focus of mine personally. So I also discerned religious life with the Benedictines for the same reason. That same kind of constellation of the traditional faith itself, it's kind of the manuscript tradition, this other vein. And then that final piece was, oh wait, this is not some kind of boutique phenomenon in terms of its liturgical expression with the traditional Roman rite, but rather, the patrimony of all Catholics through their baptism. And so then being able to access that rite and really kind of knit our family into that as a whole. So that was kind of the beginning of that. And I can't remember if you'd asked about the Tradivox project, how that it came in, or should I tie that in here? Is that
Let's go ahead and tie that in now.
Yes. So that's kind of the natural flow of that. After finishing a bachelor's and then master's theology, the networking I was able to do after that was kind of beginning to connect with other scholars in the field. Wanted to focus on catechesis specifically, just teaching the faith, some of this emphasis on good methodology, as well as the content, and then finding really through that study process and connecting with other instructors that there's this wealth of catechetical tradition as well. So that was a piece that comes as news to, I think, a lot of folks, that there's more than one catechism in the church's long teaching tradition, and in fact more than a few. There are thousands of catechisms that have been issued in the last millennium and more. And so that kind of began the research side of what has become the Tradivox project, which is really our focus now on recovering, restoring these very historic manuscripts of different Catholic catechisms issued by bishops and councils at the local and ecumenical level over the last millennium, and then being able to stack them up kind of side by side in this two-part program of one, a 20-volume hardback series, which kind of gleans the best of the best in the English language of catechisms from the last 800 years or so, and then the application portion, the digital kind of search platform aspect, which will be all from that series, as well as many more. Because, like I said, there's only so many you can fit in a hardback series, and there are thousands of catechisms in the church's tradition. So we're hoping to have this kind of ongoing, rolling harvest, really data harvest of these catechisms from across time and space, and be able to then present those to a contemporary audience in a way that they're cross-indexed, they're able to talk to each other, cross-referenceable, and then immediately so to users today.
Yeah, I look forward to getting into the online application. And I have to say, when I first came across the Tradivox project, it threw me for a loop because I had grown up with the 1992 Baltimore Catechism. And that's perhaps the only thing I knew up until maybe a few years ago. So this project is really fascinating for people who are just discovering the vast wealth of the church's tradition, specifically in regards to the different forms of catechisms that are available. So could you explain perhaps some differences that you've noticed between different versions of catechisms and how some of the basic information has changed over the years?
Sure. Well, it's a broad topic, so we could do a whole show just on that. The most remarkable difference to anyone being able to set up catechisms kind of side by side in the way that we're doing here is to see the range of audiences that are envisioned. Most, I think, folks today consider catechism, when they think catechism, they think a book, and they may think more for priests or for scholars. Of course, those familiar with the Baltimore, as it sounds like you are, this is late 1800s now. Those were very much more tailored for a lay audience. So they were question and answer format. They were highly distilled. And the reality is catechisms spread the gamut. I mean, the genre itself, although this is also a scholarly debated topic, when the genre of catechism kind of began, the safest bookend and what I tend to go with and usually share with folks is Lateran 4, so 1215, which is really a council, the ecumenical council calls for a tremendous amount of focus at the pastoral level, the parish level, for instruction for the faithful, as well as annual preparation for their annual confessions. And so that council really kind of supercharged the production of these kind of texts. And again, this is several centuries before mechanized print. I mean, and so the idea
that's impressive in and of itself.
Right. And I think there are a lot of folks that conceive of the genre as something that is either in and around the Reformation period and roughly contemporaneous with mechanized print. And it's absolutely correct to say there was an explosion in the number of titles, and the genre itself very much grew exponentially at that point, 1500s and early 1600s, especially after the Council of Trent with its catechism. So the first universal catechism authored for priests. But yes, the genre itself, far and away, I mean, you're talking several centuries prior to that. We can find texts really as early as the 9th century that stand in a catechetical frame. They're basic in doctrinal instructions that typically follow the arrangement of the Articles of the Creed, followed by moral instructions from usually based around the Ten Commandments, or the deadly sins and lively virtues, as they're sometimes called.
So I have to ask, what's the earliest catechism that Tradivox has published or looked at?
Well, the ones that we have, yes, we're mid to late 1200s. Obviously, we're in kind of circa date land by the time we get there. But there are texts by Aquinas from his Opuscula, they're called, which are kind of a scattering of different works, but many of which are structured catechetically. They're kind of in a catechetical framework. So that's circa 1260. That's very early. There's an Archbishop Petcham, who's an English archbishop, and he holds a regional. There's a synodal process there to really focus on how can we implement this, the decrees of Lateran IV, which are several years prior, but they want to have a little more focus on texts and ways to help the laity engage with the truths of the faith on a regular basis. And they have all kinds of fascinating ways of doing that. But one of them is he kind of gives really a concise catechism as one of the official acts from that synod. And so that's a very early text, and that's 1248, if I recall. So that's an early one as well.
That is truly fascinating.
Yes, so, and the modes are really neat. Just how we tend to think of ourselves as, so cutting edge, so creative, and we pat ourselves on the back with these ideas about, well, we'll have something that's really engaging so that it'll be a resource that we can really help people learn. Well, it's not like we invented that in the last century or so. Church has been at this for quite some time.
We definitely do tend to have this idea that we being of the internet age are new and inventive and creative, but people have always had the same kind of inclination towards sharing information and communicating information in creative ways.
Yes, very true.
So tell me about the program is divided into 3 specific phases. Could you elaborate on the process for moving the Tradivox program forward?
Sure thing. Well, we have kind of a major front end. The phase 1 is focused on the research side. Much of that is already complete. And in fact, it's just about complete altogether. We have some aspects that we're still chasing down. Either most of the texts themselves are there are scans that are either public domain accessible or scans that we've entered library partnerships for to access those. And so a lot of the research of the texts themselves is finished. Our biggest kind of outliers are which versions and from which libraries that we're using, these kind of things, or ones that we've archived ourselves, done international scan work for that. And so that's kind of the biggest focus in that phase 1. The second is then delivering them all to print. That's kind of the major focus for phase 2, which is well underway. So we ended up partnering with Sophia Institute Press to do the hardback printing themselves, and they've done a great job. It's very beautiful, and they were able to. In fact, I've got them on for those who might be tuning in for video. A couple of copies to hand. So they were able. We really wanted to have a look and feel that reflected some of these older catechisms, to kind of give it almost that calfskin with a embellished front piece and these kind of things. And so they were able to do that. I'm amazed they were able to do it. And so they did a very beautiful kind of look for the 20 volume series. And those will be, of course, variable length. Every volume will have, well, I should say most of the volumes will actually have more than one catechism in them. So 1 and 2 and 3 are in production already. The first 3 volumes, each of those has 3 catechisms per volume in it. Again, back in the day when you could find catechisms that were of relatively pocketable size, and so we can fit multiple texts in one volume. And that's kind of the major focus of phase 2, is to complete the print series. Which
and what is the timeline on phase 2 like?
So Sophia, one of the neat things they were able to do for us is to build it like a subscription. So it was kind of we had never really conceived of that from the outset, but I guess it's like the Encyclopedia Britannica almost. You pay for 1 volume, and then they just every quarter, they send an additional volume, and you pay for it then, kind of a thing. So it's this automated rolling subscription, and it runs for, I think, three years. For all of the volumes. So it's just kind of a one per quarter, and they keep going until all 20 are out. And then that final volume is just a standalone index. And frankly, that's the one I'm the most excited about, is the index volume. This is really the tool where, similar to what the app will do, but this is the tool where you'll be able to page through topically. We'll have several different indices in that volume. So some will be arranged alphabetically, like you typically see. Some will be systematic indexes. Those familiar with the old dogmatic treatises will be familiar with this kind of a template, scriptural indices, these kind of things, such that I can see kind of at a glance, where is the Eucharist in every catechism, of this particular series. and then I can index that, immediately to those page numbers and such. So that's really the focus with phase 2. The third phase is then the digital portion, which is already underway. We have it. It's functional now. We have several that are in it, and the design team is very excited about that. In fact, one of our project our kind of managers on the digital side sent something to me the other day. He said, I had a friend ask me about what was it? It was the glorified body. He said some friend asked me about the Catholic doctrine of the resurrection and the glorified body, and I just thought, boy, it'd be really great to have some. Wait a minute, and he went on the tool, just which is all behind the curtain, of course, still, and he ran his own search, and he said, boy, this is really handy to have. I can just look at these very concise answers from all these catechisms, and then I could just give somebody that, at a glance. So that's really the focus for phase 3, is to bring that app out to kind of full usability, and then with kind of an open door software model, such that we will be able to just continue to load in catechetical content as going forward.
That's fascinating. So who is the app being marketed to specifically? Is it individual subscribers, groups, or parishes?
We're going to do all of the above. Even the volumes themselves, we've seen interest from the widest possible demographic. I have been, and I just tend to focus on the research side and the content, and so we've all, I think, been a little surprised by that. When we were first really conceiving of even the digital tool, we had more in view a scholarly apparatus. This would be of relatively limited appeal and very valuable for scholarship, for universities, for libraries, and so on. But even the physical texts have been surprisingly well received. We have been inundated with feedback and requests, multi-language versions, all of these things, because I think there is a tremendous hunger for the content. That was a big focus of His Excellency Bishop Schneider, he's the Episcopal advisor for our project, and he was very encouraging of making this as widely available to even to just a lay, a general lay audience as possible. And he was absolutely right. I mean, there has been a huge interest in the content and making it more available. So we're hoping to do just kind of an open source platform, at least for a good amount of the content in terms of the application side.
You bring up an interesting point that you're marketing this not just to an English speaking audience, but to across multiple languages. So what other languages are you translating these catechisms into?
Well, that is all Sophia's ballpark now for the texts themselves, and we have fielded interest in French, in Portuguese, in Polish, Spanish. So I think every major European language we've had at least interest expressed, and so I'm hopeful that we'll be able to really bring in all of those. There's the other aspect that we're also kind of actively keeping on the burner with the digital portion is all of these kind of auto translate and text to speech and these different kind of software components are really just coming into their own right now, and so we're kind of keeping an eye on that as well, because I think there's a number of us that would love to see the day when I could be in my car and turn on my Bluetooth thing, or whateve, and just say, read to me, what does the Catechism teach on angels, and then just it would just instantly, respond vocally, like a Jarvis, like a Siri, like pick your digital assistant voice and say, which catechism would you like to hear that from, or which century, or which nation state, and then just begin to go through that. We're already looking at self-grading quiz applications, assess my own doctrinal knowledge, and then it'll auto-generate a study program for me, and the content is only from approved catechisms of the last millennium. So it's not there's no spin. It's just these texts, but able to kind of be voiced in our own circumstances. hence the name. So the name Tradivox, a lot of people ask, like, what is that? And it's a portmanteau of the Latin, traditio and vox, just tradition and voice. We want to give voice to the tradition, not to present something unique or creative. The Germans have a great word, des Unbeliebigkeit, which is just the uncreativeness. That's really our focus here, is just to be able to give voice, allow these catechisms, allow these great master catechists and bishops, priests and councils of the past to speak for themselves.
It's really interesting because you're really giving users a new way to interact with the material. So by doing these self-grading quizzes and like presenting it in an online format is bringing it to life in a way that wouldn't have been possible only with the hardback version.
That's right, and even just a few years ago, I mean, I continually think of St. Maximilian Kolbe as well, who is another great and fairly recent champion of really enlisting current technologies in the service of propagation of the faith. And so this is definitely one of the ways that we're trying to do that.
Yeah, it was really funny. I think there's a new messaging app based on his radio call sign.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Speaking of new technology.
Great.
So there's a lot of great marketing material on your website. How can somebody access that and then go promote Tradivox to their local group or parish?
Sure. Well, there are several things. I mean, as you mentioned, our website, just tradivox.com, we have a lot of material content that's there available already. But then we respond to folks for queries that we get a fairly regular basis of or folks that'll invite. We'd love to have a presentation. I was just today was speaking with somebody else at a parish that we'd love to have a presentation on just the nature of the catechetical tradition. Bishops who want to do things like this for their catechists. I mean, there's a lot of dioceses now that have schools of catechesis. They build it out different ways, but where we can come, we can present on any particular text, of course. But I think more commonly, it's the idea of this abiding continuity of the Church's common doctrine, and how that in and of itself is traceable through these catechisms, from past centuries and past cultures. I mean, you just cannot ignore the continuity when examined in reference to the kind of sitz im Leben of each of these texts. I mean, you're talking about texts that are medieval Italy to sub-Saharan Africa of the late Middle Ages to the Kirishitans in Japan, the Kakuri Kirishitans, who have these texts, that are strictly contraband. I mean, so any to suburban America, 1950s, so we have this kind of range of cultural contexts, of ethnic backgrounds, of even duration of the faith in these different areas, and then across all of that spectrum, being able to trace, here's that continuity of doctrine, and here it is expressed in this setting, and the just the beautiful way that those rhyme from time to time and place to place, which is something that Bishop Schneider has pointed out for non-Catholics. I mean, this is a tremendous motive of credibility with regard to the divine nature of the Church. When you can say, what other institution do you know of that has this kind of variety and stays on message, for this long and in this kind of varied context. So that is a very powerful motive of credibility too.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That kind of continuity doesn't exist anywhere else on earth. So what are the full extent of the fundraising needs for Tradivox, and how will donations be used to fund the program during its final stages?
It's great. Yes, we're of course partnered with Christus Vincit for 50,000, kind of our goal. The funding there is largely for our editorial contracts. So we have, as can be imagined, a wide stable of. I forgot to mention this too. So our team, the Tradivox team, is comprised of we're over 60 different volunteers and/or paid contractors right now, and we are in several countries. The COVID has, like every nonprofit, set everything in a tizzy, but but we have been pressing forward, and we have great staying on target for the delivery of the print system, the print resource itself. And that is the 20 volume series with Sophia Press, and that's in production. That'll continue for the next few years. Every quarter, one of those volumes coming out. We're right now we're in volume 7, production for 7. So there will always be several volumes ahead of which one is currently out. So and it is 1 through 3 are currently available. So most of the funding, yes, will be for kind of finalizing our editorial contracts through the rest of the print series, as well as then launching the digital application. And that we're hoping for 2022 for the digital portion.
That's great.
Yes.
It's a very short timeline.
Well, we've been at it for a while. It's amazing because now we feel like we're drinking from a fire hose a little bit, because it's only really 2019 that we kind of became known. So.
True.
So yes, but the work has progressed for several years prior to that. So it's great to be out and to be doing this. And I think the response has really helped demonstrate to our team, especially, the timeliness, of the work itself, and the value of it. I think there's, everybody wants to feel that what they're doing has some kind of enduring value, and this couldn't be clearer from these kind of texts, being able to represent them now, when in some cases, they've been totally lost to obscurity. Many of these catechisms have not seen the light of day for centuries. But then to have them remastered now and be able to be in a contemporary readership now, but more importantly, in this kind of concert with each other, that's really the value, I think, that we're seeing here.
I think you hit the nail on the head with the word enduring, because it really shows the timelessness of the information and just the eternal nature of the church in general.
Yes, I agree. I think the probably one of the more outstanding parts historically is each of the stories of these texts. So in the hardback volumes, we're doing a little preface just to kind of tell the story of the different catechisms themselves, because it's amazing. I mean, just to be able to get into these different time periods, where they've originated. And the great patrons of our project are the English martyrs, because of course many of the texts either trace their lineage to that period, or were written by them and for them, the English martyrs themselves, the Elizabethan kind of period. And so getting into the stories of, this catechism maintained the faith, in this country, when it was outlawed, when it was hotly persecuted, when you could be jailed, fined, tortured, killed for even owning a catechism like this. And here it is. This is what they read, and now it's in your hands. You read it.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because it's really putting the personal stories behind what perhaps somebody would perceive as just a dry textbook.
Yes, and I think the aspect of putting them up together like that, both with their content and with their stories, helps to kind of parse out this the myth of doctrine that can develop into its opposite, which we see very frequently around just this relativistic culture that we live in. This idea that some divine truth can, at a later time or given some different set of circumstances, evolve, into its opposite. And the catechisms stand as a perpetual monument to the contrary. I mean, you could not get a clearer indictment of that idea than being able to look at these very short, concise distillations of the faith, oftentimes penned, not always, but frequently, predominantly even, authored for a more kind of average readership, often lay, and be able to look at those, yes, side by side, and say, yes, you can absolutely see variance and fluctuation in these different historically conditioned articulations of the doctrine, but they are a monolith. I mean, and it just can't be ignored in that kind of collection, that chorus, of voices over time and space.
Well, I'm so glad that there's an organization out there that's working to preserve these works. And just for all listeners, there's a link to donate to Tradivox directly below. And yes, thank you for all the work you've been doing.
Thank you, Claudia. It's great to be doing it and to see that there's the faith is alive and well, and there are seekers, out there. It's great.
So, well, thank you everybody for listening. This has been the Christus Vincit Foundation program. I'm Claudia Wert, Executive Director of CVF, and our guest today has been Aaron Seng of Tradivox. And again, thank you so much for coming on the program, and we hope to hear more from you in the future.